But perhaps those rare spoken words embedded in the heavy dough of the chronicles helped me even more. The retorts, some of a military brusqueness, others of an Italian finesse, the curt, lofty remark of the husband admitting that he would have got divorced, quote, had he been a private citizen, end of quote. The bitter reflections of the aged man who cites Virgil at the deathbed of his heir, Tu Marcellus eris, purpureos spargum flores, but refuses the dead man official honors and grieves about all for himself. Quote, all that has already cost the state too much money. I leaned against a crumbling wall, end of quote. The irritated complaint of the sick man, quote, the doctors have killed me, end of quote, whose last motto was nonetheless patientia. Very little to go on, bits of voice out of which to reconstitute an entire tone or timbre of voice. The way others reconstitute a broken statue out of fragments of marble, and someone may say that tone and timbre here are nothing other than temperament, comportment, or character traits. I would agree if the language of our characters is so important, that is because it expresses or betrays them completely. I don't flatter myself that I always succeeded. A passage that delights many readers, the almost lyric description of Hadrian's voyages with Antinous through Greece and Asia, seems to me now a piece of bravura. An aria which focuses on what I have Hadrian call the summit of his years of happiness. I still believe that the emperor, retrospectively calling up his memories, could have seen them that way, vividly colored like the large frescoes at Herculaneum, stylized like the bas-reliefs of his hunts on the medallions of the future Arch of Constantine. But I no longer believe that he would have recounted them in quite that fashion, or if so, am I then to suppose that at that moment he would plunge into a sort of Propertian or Tibulan elegy, making use, as it were, of all the resources of literature? I don't hold the passage against him or against myself. It is always difficult to recount a moment of happiness. I had the opportunity to verify, as if with a touchstone, the authenticity of another passage. A professor asked his students to translate into Greek. I should like to be able to say, retranslate that page where the emperor describes the state of atony which overcame him after the death of Antinous. I attempted it as well. Immediately, the addenda in a more modern tone became as discernible as the plaster which joins two fragments of a statue. Let me cite the passage, putting in italics the part which quite definitely does not work. Quote, the journey up the river continued, but my course lay on the Styx. In prisoners' camps on the banks of the Danube, I had once seen wretches continually beating their heads against a wall, with a wild motion, both mad and tender, endlessly repeating the same name. In the underground chambers of the Colosseum, I had been shown lions pining away because the dog with which their keepers had accustomed them to live had been taken away. I tried to collect my thoughts. Antinous was dead. End of quote. 8 words refused to be written in Greek. They could have been written a bit more easily in Latin, a language which already underscores emotions as ours does, but in which language had I imagined that Hadrian, who was bilingual, was dictating his memoirs to me? No doubt sometimes in Latin and sometimes in Greek, which gave me a certain freedom. Yet there are moments when inadvertently I caused him to speak the French of my day. And these 8 words seem to me, as I reread them, to constitute one such moment. The reader will ask why I do not then remove them, because the impression, if not the expression, seems authentic to me. And because I regard inexactitude a bit the way the emperor, in my opinion, regarded risk. That is, after all precautions have been taken, it is right to let inexactitude play its part, and even to welcome the enrichments it may bring us. On condition, of course, that that part should be as small as possible. Before leaving the emperor, I should like to protest against an adjective I too often see affixed to the titles Memoirs of Hadrian and articles that are otherwise full of praise. Apocryphal. Apocryphal is used, or should only be used, for what is false and tries to pass as true. The ballads of Ossian, composed by Macpherson, were apocryphal because they pretended to be by Ossian. Fraud is implicit in the word. My observation is neither irritable nor, it seems to me, trifling. That improper adjective, it would be better to speak of imaginary memoirs, indicates how little critics and the public are accustomed to the passionate reconstitution, at once detailed and free of a moment or a man out of the past. The abyss is polyphonic rather than monodic. It contains many conversations, from brief exchanges of a practical nature, yet inevitably charged with some emotional potential, to meandering dialogues where two interlocutors in agreement or in partial disagreement pass an idea back and forth between them in perfect trust, or on the contrary, through double and triple layers of dissembled thought. Unlike Memoirs of Hadrian, the book is not written in the first person. That is to say, its world is not seen and described by one central character. In fact, just as I had felt early on that the tone of Memoirs of Hadrian would gain in accuracy from passing through the voice of the emperor, I quickly perceived that in The Abyss, the contrast between the tone of voice of a modern narrator and that of characters from another century would be intolerable, and that the narrated part should be done as much as possible in the indirect style, sometimes passing through Zeno himself or some other major or minor character, sometimes through the voice of the people, as if through a muffled and almost always half-witted choral whispering. Life reconsidered by Hadrian from the perspective of memory gave way to life experience from day to day at a level very close to the level of spoken language. Up to a point, the literary style of the 16th century helped me with its concreteness and directness and specificity it had inherited in part from one aspect of the Middle Ages. But verbal exchanges as such are as rare as they are in the literature of antiquity. The Latin dialogues of Erasmus are to the highest degree written. Those of Aretino furnish a mine of information about the low life of his time, but they belong to the genre, which abounds everywhere, of the more or less satirical rendering of popular life. Italian comedy is highly stylized. The actual, quote, words, end of quote, reported by the chroniclers of the time mostly consist, as with the ancients, not of bits of conversation, but of memorable phrases like that response, so fine because so immediate, made by the wife of the admirable de Coligny to her husband, who had given her 2 weeks to make a dangerous decision. Quote, "The 2 weeks are already over, sir," end of quote. Quote, "My husband, the fortnight is already past," end of quote, from the mouth of Hilzond in The Abyss echoes this in a similar situation, end of quote. Quote, "My husband, the fortnight is already past," end of quote, from the mouth of Hilzonda in The Abyss echoes this in a similar situation. The same is true of the odious jokes uttered by the German shop at Bruno's execution, which I borrowed for Zeno's trial. Only Shakespeare and here and there his Elizabethan emulators give us, but a generation after the date when The Abyss ends, the lively tone of verbal exchanges in the 16th century, at least in those passages where a certain rhetoric hasn't smothered them, but that passionate rhetoric is itself characteristic of the time. Some of the lyrical soliloquies of Lear or Hamlet, which audibly belong to the world of the theater, nonetheless tell us something about the language for emotions violently felt by certain especially strong or thoughtful people. They shed a light on the thinking, feeling men at the end of that century, which we don't have again in the same intensity for any other era before our own. There is a constant shifting between the written and the spoken in certain works of the 16th century. Not in all, of course. The humanists who copied antiquity destroyed scholastic routines of thought and expression, but only to create others. Essentially oratorical, which have sometimes lasted down to our time. Those works we still read in any case are very close to the oral mode. When we read Montaigne, we often feel we are silently participating in a unilateral conversation. All the freshness and rudeness of common speech is in Luther. The exchange of indignant letters between Agrippa of Nettesheim and an honest curate of Metz on the subject of a scandalous Inquisition affair has all the heat of oral testimony. In the journal, which Durer kept as a strictly personal memorandum and in more of a spoken than a written style, his notes on the death of his mother burst from the page in the midst of his financial accounts and descriptions of wayside lodgings. And we are haunted by the mixture of sketches and incomplete phrases he jotted down when he awoke from a nightmare. Beyond such intimate works, we encounter the secret ones privately in his mirror writing. Leonardo composed notebooks which were for him alone. And the fact that they have appeared only by accident some 3 centuries later gives us the feeling of entering unencumbered by any intermediary interpretation into the very interior of a man of genius making a record of himself without any witnesses. They are unliterary notebooks, for Leonardo was even more of an autodidact than Zeno, yet they achieve the poetry of pure tone, like everything that comes directly from the self. Some of the secret reports of the ambassadors of Venice have the sound of a whispering voice, the soiled pages in an Italian jargon besmirched with Latin of the scribe who put down in writing the incoherent mumblings of Campanella when he was being subjected to torture, or those of the informer who noted down the words the philosopher exchanged with his friend Fra Pietro Ponzio in prison, seem even more literally slices of life. Cries torn from a man thrashing about in anguish and the clandestine echo of a conversation that was already clandestine. In their time, they were shown only to the rather distracted or astute eyes of the judges, and they were buried in the judicial archives of the Kingdom of Naples until their publication in 1886. Yet it seems as though their specific horror has not evaporated in the slightest in the time between the actual event and now. In the abyss, I made no use of the first of these documents, having spared Zeno torture in order to avoid any touch of melodrama. From the second, I took only the affectionate Fra Pietro's imus ad dormiendum in his Cor Meum, which Zeno hears murmured out of the depths of his past by the voice of another friend a quarter of an hour before his death. Yet no other piece of writing has ever so vividly brought me the auditory shock of the crumbling of the walls of time.